Happy New Year, everybody. It is 2024, and whatever your 2023 was like, I hope for a fantastic year for you and your families ahead in 2024. So with that in mind, we're going to start out with a topic I don't know a lot about. I've acknowledged before on this channel that one of the big holes in my area of history knowledge is Eastern Asia history. And I want to try and rectify that a little bit in 2024. So we're going to be diving into today Bill Wurtz, he of the history of the entire world, I guess, fame. In fact, that is the video on my channel that has the most views, is my reaction to his history of the entire world, I guess. So we'll see how this one goes. His other kind of big video that he had was History of Japan. It's only a 9-minute video, so this will probably be a 20-25 minute reaction, depending on how much I have to say about it. Link is in the description if you haven't already seen it, so you can check it out for yourself without my commentary. Let's go ahead and dive in.
Japan is an island by the sea filled with volcanoes, and it's beautiful. In the year -1 billion, Japan might not have been here. In the year -40,000, it was here, and you could walk to it, and some people walked to it. Then it got warmer, some icebergs melted, it became an island, and now there's lots of...
So, growing up in the United States, we, in our history, talk constantly about the land bridge over the Bering Strait, right, between Alaska and and Russia, and that's how people came to this country. And we know that at one point there was Pangea, and everything was kind of one big giant continent that kind of separated over time. But I never knew that there was at one time believed to be a land bridge between the Korean Peninsula and Japan. Interesting.
Trees, because it's warmer. So now there's people on the island. They're basically sort of hanging out in between the mountains, eating nuts off trees and using the latest technology, like stones and bowls. Ding dong, it's the outside world, and they have technology from the future, like really good metal and crazy rice farms. Now you can make a lot of rice really, really quickly. That means if you own the farm, you own a lot of food, which is something everybody needs to survive. So that makes you king. Rice farming and rice kingdoms spread across the land, all the way to here. The most important kingdoms were here, 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 and here. But this one was the most important, ruled by a heavenly superperson, or emperor for short. Knock knock, get the door, it's religion. The new prince wants everyone to try this hot new religion from Biekt. Please try this religion, he said. No, said everybody. Try it, he said. No, said everybody again, quieter this time. And so the religion was put into place, and all the rules that came with it. Then the government was taken over by another clique, and then...
So it's interesting, no matter what part of the world you're in, the intersection of religion and politics, religion and government is inescapable. For Europe, you have the Greek pantheon of religions, then you have the Romans, and then of course you have Christianity coming in from the Middle East and Africa and even parts of Europe. It's going to be Islam later on, and all of that is going to drive so much of what happens historically, and Japan's no different.
They made some reforms, like making the government govern more, and making the government more like China's government, which is a government that governs more. Hi, China, they said. Hi, dipshit, said China. Can you call us something else other than dipshit, said Japan. Like what, said China. How about Sunrise Land, said Japan.
Oh, and that makes total sense. So Nihon or Nippon, sometimes you see it, the name for Japan, Sunrise Land. I never realized that, but I guess if you're looking at a map, where's the first place the sun rises as it's coming from the east? It's going to be Japan, and then it's going to work its way this way. So that makes total sense. And then, of course, the rising sun, the land of the rising sun. I guess I never put two and two together that the land of the rising sun is literally what Japan means. That's crazy.
They stole China's alphabet and wrote a book about themselves. And then they made lots of poetry and art and another book about themselves. Then they stopped moving the capital every time the emperor died and kept it in one place for a while, right here. And they conquered the north.
Kyoto is going to be the capital for, at least 1,000 years, right? It's only recently that Tokyo became the capital.
Get that squared away. A rich hipster named Kukai is bored with modern Buddhism, visits China, and learns a better version, which is more spiritual. Comes back, reinvents the alphabet, and causes art and literature to be great for a long time. And the royal palace turned into such a dream world of art that they really didn't give a shit about running the country. So if you live outside the palace, how are you supposed to protect your shit from criminals? Hire a samurai. Everyone started hiring samurai. Rich, important people hired samurai. Poor people who could not afford to hire samurai did not hire samurai.
So I always in my mind pictured samurai as kind of like the knights of Japan, but I can see here right away that they're really kind of different. They're more of almost like a law enforcement agent, so to speak. Interesting.
The samurai became organized and powerful, more powerful than the government, so they made their own military government. Here, they let the emperor still be emperor, but the shogun is actually in control.
And this is another thing that happens throughout history. Very often the person who has the title of ruler, a king, an emperor, is not necessarily the most powerful person because you don't have standing armies at this point. So in England, for example, you have time periods where a guy like Henry Bolingbroke, who's going to become Henry IV, is able to muster a more powerful force than the king, Richard II. He's able to overthrow him, even though Richard II was the king. He didn't have the military behind him because there wasn't just an army he could call on at any time. You had all of these men that you had to call on their forces, and if their loyalty went elsewhere, you were in trouble. So the military leader, you can see why at this time in history is going to have all the influence and all the power.
Breaking news. The Mongols have invaded China.
We've invaded China,
said the Mongols.
Please respect us, or else we might invade you as well.
Okay, said Japan.
Bring it.
So the Mongols came over, ready for war, and died in a tornado. But they tried again and had a nice time fighting with the Japanese, but then died in a tornado. Then the emperor overthrows the shogunate. Then the shogunate overthrows him back and moves to Kyoto and makes a new shogunate. And the emperor...
And so you can imagine if you see the weather coming to your aid multiple times in a situation like against the Mongols, you're going to start to think that God or the gods or whatever your religion might be is on your side. The divine wind, kamikaze, that comes and protects you when it comes to it.
Emperor can still dress like an emperor if he wants, that's fine. Now there's more art. Like painting with less colors, collaborative poetry, plays, monkey fun, tea parties, gardening, architecture, flowers. It's time for who's going to be the next shogun. Usually it's the shogun's kid, but the shogun doesn't have a kid, so he tries to get his brother to quit being a monk and be the next shogun. He says okay, but then the shogun has a kid. So now who's it going to be? Vote now on your phones. And everyone voted so hard that the palace caught on fire and burned down. The shogun actually didn't care. He was off somewhere doing poetry. And the whole country broke into pieces. Everyone is fighting with each other for local power, and it's anybody's game.
This is like clan warfare in Scotland. So I didn't know a lot about all of the art and poetry and things like that were going on here. And maybe part of the reason why is because Japan is so isolated. They're not really spreading their culture to other places. And if anything, they're importing culture from places like China. We've seen that a couple times now with religion. So they're not really influencing the culture world so much.
Knock knock, it's Europe. No, they're not here to take over. They just want to sell some shit, like clocks, and guns, and Jesus. So that's cool, but everyone's still fighting each other for control, now with guns. And wouldn't it be nice to control the capital, which right now is puppets, with no one controlling them? This clan is ready to make a run for it, but first they have to trample this smaller clan, which is in the way. Surprise, the smaller clan wins, and the leader of that clan steals the idea of invading the capital and invades the capital, and it goes very well. He's about halfway through conquering Japan when someone who works for him kills him, and then someone else who works for him kills them, and that guy finishes conquering Japan. And then he
So this is the first time we really see Japan completely united from north to south.
confiscated everybody's swords and made some rules. And now I'm going to invade Korea.
Wait, let me see what this rule says here.
Conquering Japan. And then he confiscated everybody's swords and made some rules.
No having a sword or a gun, no climbing the social ladder, pay taxes. Yeah, if you're in a position of high authority, two things you want to do is you want to disarm anybody who's a threat to you, and number two, you want to prevent anybody from rising to the top who might become a threat to you intellectually or charismatically, things like that. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you want to keep them down and keep them as weak as possible.
And now I'm going to invade Korea and then hopefully China, he said, and failed, and also died. But before he died, he told these 5 guys to take care of his 5-year-old son until he's old enough to be the next ruler of Japan. And the 5 guys said, yeah, right, it's not going to be this kid, it's going to be one of us, because we're grown-ups. And it's probably going to be this guy, who happens to be way more rich and powerful than the others. A
little flash of Donald Trump there. Anytime in history, regardless of what country or what culture or religion or anything, anytime you have powerful adult men who are being asked to be subservient to a child king or emperor, those adult men are going to see an opportunity to take power for themselves. It happens in every nation, happens so much of history is determined by the fact that child leaders can't govern themselves, and the people who rule on their behalf take the power.
A lot of people support him, but a lot of people support not supporting him. They have a fight, and he wins and starts a new government right here. And he still lets the emperor dress like an emperor and have very nice things. But don't get confused. This is the new government, and they are very strict. So strict they close the country. No one can leave, and no one can come in. Except for the Dutch, if they want to buy and sell shit. But they have to do it right here. Now that the entire country was not at war with itself, the population increased a lot. Business increased, schools were built, roads were built, everyone learned to read, books were published.
Look at what can happen when a potentially powerful nation stops warring with itself and builds instead. Imagine if 600 or 700 years ago, China stopped infighting and built a strong, cohesive nation. They would dominate the world way more than they do in real life today. I mean, but there was so much infighting and so many times that they had these civil wars. I mean, China would probably be 80% of the world's population now if they hadn't killed each other for centuries.
There was poetry, plays, sexy times, puppet shows, and Dutch studies. People started to study European science from books they bought from the Dutch. We're talking geography, skeletons, physics, chemistry, astronomy, and maybe even electricity. Over time, the economic and cultural prosperity began to gradually slow down. Knock, knock.
The U.S.
It's the
is
United
here.
States, with huge boats, with guns, gunboats. Open the country. Stop having it be closed, said the United States. There was really nothing they could do, so they...
How many times in history, and a number of those times have involved the United States, has a country come in and tried to manipulate what they perceive as a possibly smaller or weaker country to try and do their bidding for their own personal gain and have that backfire on them? The United States comes in the middle of the 19th century, forces Japan to open to the world. And what does that do? It causes Japan to modernize, and Japan's going to become a big threat to the United States in the Pacific 50, 60 years later when the U.S. is trying to project power in the Pacific. Now they're going to find Japan as their chief rival in that area.
They signed a contract that lets the United States, Britain, and Russia visit Japan anytime they want. Choshu and Satsuma hated this. That sucks, they said. This sucks. And with almost very
So
little...
if you've seen the film The Last Samurai, it's kind of fictionalized version of this rebellion that's going to happen. It's kind of spun as the last stand of the samurai. It's the old versus the new. It's Japan modernizing. And a lot of people think it's the samurai with swords against guys with Gatling guns. Nah, the samurai had guns too.
outside help, they overthrew the shogunate and somehow made the emperor again and moved him to Edo, which they renamed Eastern Capital.
Tokyo.
They made a new government, which was a lot more Western. They made a new constitution that was pretty Western, and a military that was pretty Western.
They modernized. They've been forced to modernize now that they are open to the outside world. And basically, I mean, you could kind of argue that in a sense here, the United States awakened a sleeping giant a little bit.
And do you know what else is Western? That's right, it's conquering stuff. So what can we conquer?
It's that
Korea.
time.
They conquer Korea, taking it from its previous owner, China, and then go a little bit further. And Russia rushes in out of nowhere and says, "Stop, no, you can't take that. We were going to build a railroad through here to try to get some warm water." And Russia builds their railroad, supervised by a shit ton of soldiers. And then when the railroad was done, they downgraded to a fuck ton. Did I say downgrade? I meant upgrade. And Japan says, "Can you maybe chill?" And Russia says, "How about maybe you chill?" Japan is kind of scared of Russia. You'll never guess who's also kind of scared of Russia. Great Britain. So Japan and Great Britain make an alliance together so they can be a little less scared of Russia. Feeling confident, Japan goes to war against Russia, just for a moment, and then they both get tired and
then Russia's going to send a fleet that's going to get just trounced by the Japanese.
stop. It's time for World War I. The world is about to have a war because it's the 1900s and weapons are getting
Really
crazy.
kind of surprised he didn't touch on the Russo-Japanese War just a little bit more than that, because that was a big deal. And in many ways, World War I is born out of a lot of what is learned in the Russo-Japanese War, because they learn a lot of how these modern weapons are going to work and how modern navies are going to work. And it's almost like a testing ground for a lot of the weapons and the tactics that are going to be used a decade later in the First World War.
And all these empires are excited to try them out on each other. Meanwhile, Japan has been enjoying conquering stuff and wants more. And the next thing on their list is this part of China and lots of tiny islands. All that stuff belongs to Germany, which just had war declared on it by Britain because Britain was friends with Belgium, which was being trespassed by Germany in order to get to France to kick France's ass because France is friends with Russia, who was getting ready to kick Austria's ass because Austria was getting ready to kick Serbia's ass because someone from Serbia shot the leader of Austria's ass.
That's a pretty succinct and accurate way to describe the system of alliances that start World War I.
Actually shot him in the head. And Britain is currently friends with Japan, so you know what that means. Duh, Japan should take the islands.
So Japan and Italy and other nations sometimes, in this case Japan and Italy especially, are going to jump into World War I, not because they're necessarily going to be able to contribute a lot militarily, but because they see an opportunity while the Central Powers like Austria-Hungary and Germany are distracted that they can gobble up stuff. So Italy wants some land back from Austria-Hungary. Japan wants some of these German possessions in the South Pacific. And so they're really not jumping in on the war necessarily for any great ideological reasons, but more about, free stuff.
Which they wanted to do anyway, so they called Britain on the telly to sort of let them know. And then they did it. And they also helped Britain a little here and there with some errands and stuff. Now the war is over, and congratulations, Japan. You technically fought in the war, which means you get to sit at the negotiating table with the big dudes, where they decided who owns what.
And then Japan shows up at the Paris Peace Conferences, and they're really upset that they don't get a bigger say in things than they do. Well, you didn't do all that much. I mean, if you're looking at this as someone like France or the British who lose 1 million men plus in this war, you're going to say, Japan, just sit down. We'll take this.
And yes, Japan gets to keep all that shit they stole from Germany. You also get to join the post-war mega alliance, the League of Nations, whose mission statement is to try not to take over the world. The Great Depression is bad, and Japan's economy is now crappy, but the military is doing just fine, and it invades Manchuria. And the League of Nations is like, no, don't do that. If you're in the League of Nations, you're not supposed to take over the world. And Japan said, how about I do anyway? And Japan invaded more and more and more and more of China.
And you could make the argument, some people will make the argument that really this is the start of World War I or World War II. The reason I would say it's not is because traditionally we say World War II begins with the invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939 by the Germans. Why does that make it World War? Well, because that's when a bunch of other countries jump in. At this point, it's Japan and China, and they're fighting what is really just the Sino-Japanese War. You don't have a situation where Japan invades China and Russia and the United States and a bunch of other countries jump in because of it. So to me, while it is connected and it does tie directly into the causes of the war in the Pacific, it's a separate thing.
Planning to invade the entire East.
You've got mail.
It's from Germany, the new leader of Germany. He has a cool mustache and he's trying to take over the world and needs friends. This also got forwarded to Italy. They all decided to be friends because they had so much in common. It's time for World War II. Germany is invading the neighbors. Then they invade the neighbors' neighbors. Then the neighbors' neighbors' neighbors, who happened to be Britain, said, holy shit. And the United States started helping Britain because they are good friends.
And not only the British, but also the Russians. A lot of stuff gets sent to the Russians.
Not helping Japan because they're friends and our friends are not friends. Plus they're planning on invading the entire ocean. The United States is also working on a large, very huge bomb, bigger than any other bomb, ever, just in case. But they still haven't joined the war. War looks bad on TV.
That's a great point. The development of the bomb really was, I think at least initially, more with Germany in mind, and it was more about getting one before the Germans did. Japan only becomes the target because the war ends in Europe in May of 1945, and now they're having struggles with the Japanese, and the Allies are seeing what is happening in some of these islands, places like Okinawa, where just massive casualties because the Japanese are going to fight to the last man, and even the civilians are not willing to give up. And so they're kind of anticipating that, man, if this is what it's like landing on one of these islands, what's it going to be like when we invade the home islands of Japan?
And the United States is really starting to care about their image. But then Japan spits on them in Hawaii and challenges them to war. And they say yes. And then Germany, as a symbol of friendship, declares war on the United States also. So the United States goes to war in Europe, and they help the gang chase Germany back into Germany. And they also start chasing Japan back into Japan. And they haven't used the bomb yet and are curious to see if it works. So they drop it on Japan. They actually dropped 2.
And that little drawing he had actually looks like the Fat Man bomb, which is the one that was dropped on Nagasaki. The difference between the two bombs, if you haven't seen like the movie Oppenheimer, there were uranium bombs and plutonium bombs. We had a hard time coming up with enough material to make the same kinds of bombs. And so the plutonium bomb involved an implosion. So you had to have it was fatter. That's why they call it Fat Man, because of the way it had to be built in order to set off the chain reaction with the plutonium. I'm not a scientist, but that's basically why that bomb was a different shape than the little boy bomb.
The United States installed a new government.
And a lot of people will argue, and I think there's something to be said for the fact that the Soviet Union did declare war on Japan around this time. And so you could say, well, was it the bombs alone? Was it the Soviet Union? Was it both? I think it's probably both. The Soviets had an agreement with the Allies that 3 months after the end of the war in Europe, they would get involved in Japan to bring that one to an end. And so they did basically follow their agreement almost to the day, just in time for the war to end.
Inspired by the United States government, with just the right ingredients for a post-war economic miracle. And Japan starts making TVs, VCRs, automobiles, and camcorders as fast as they can, and also better than everybody else. They get rich, and the economy goes wild, and then the miracle wears off. But everything's still pretty cool, I guess. Bye.
All right, that was pretty good. Obviously, like I said, I don't know a ton about Japan. I want to learn more. I want to get better in terms of my knowledge, at least have some knowledge of Eastern Asian history. So add to the conversation. What did I miss? What didn't I talk about? What do you think should have been said in the midst of all of what we did? Obviously, you can't do justice to an amazing country like Japan and its storied history over thousands of years in the span of a 9-minute video. So there's going to be a lot of things you're going to miss. So let me know what I missed, what we should be talking about in the comment section below. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.